everyone, I'm Natalie's mentor. My name is Georgie Nolan. I'm a designer, researcher, educator and PhD student at RMIT in Melbourne, looking at design and futures. Before I introduce my mentee, Natalie, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I meet with you today, as well as the native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. My incredibly talented mentee, Natalie Field, is an interdisciplinary artist from South Africa. She is currently an MFA candidate at the Trondheim Academy of Fine Art in Norway. Her material-led practice is situated in the field of speculative taxidermy, where she investigates past and present relations between human and non-human animals. Her work she is presenting today is called Museum of Extinction, the Field Ornithology Collection, and it considers questions central to her MFA thesis. How can the representation of animal materialities in art and artifacts reform public opinion about the sixth mass extinction? Natalie and I have had a wonderful time working together over the course of this mentorship program between Oslo, Glasgow, and now with me in Melbourne, taking these thoughtful artifacts and creating this speculative world for them to live in. I've never known so much about the taxidermy process and find it completely fascinating, so thank you, Natalie, for that. I look forward to seeing how you continue to share your powerful message. Here is Natalie to take you inside the Museum of Extinction.
Hello, I'm assuming that I can start, so I will share my screen.
Perfect. Thanks, Natalie.
So I would also just like to thank Georgie for that very lovely introduction and thank her for all the many hours and deep discussions that we've had. Her contributions to my project has been very meaningful. And I also want to thank Diana Wren, who was helping us in the Writers' Circle. She really helped me with my thesis. And then obviously to everybody else at Creature Conserve as well. So the project that I'm presenting today is called the Museum of Extinction, and it is about the recontextualization of animal artifacts through artistic intervention. So I would like to start with a word of caution that what I share with you today might disturb the empathetic soul, like it does my own. Working with animal death can be rather graphic, and I've tried to spare you the worst of it while still showing elements of my process. So I hope that you too will see that this work is necessary. So this project has been created in light of my Masters of Fine Art research that I'm doing at the Kunstakademie i Trondheim, and that's in Norway. And I'm exploring this research question: how can the representation of animal materialities in art and artifacts reform public opinion about the sixth mass extinction? So this presentation will share some key points of my research, which is structured around field notes, my observations, captures on my adventures in and with the museums, as well as give a naughty little sneak peek into the works that I will be showing in our graduation showcase, which is opening at the Chipmansgate Kunst in Trondheim on the 5th of May. And I would like you all to consider yourself officially invited. So with my thesis, also known as a critical reflection text due at the end of March, I've had to ask myself, what does it mean to be self-reflexive? The process of self-reflexivity requires taking a critical view of oneself and your work or your creations to refer and discuss the same. So the sculpture Arrested Decay, which you can see in progress running here, could be described as self-reflexive, as it is a commentary on the very craft that created it, taxidermy. The assemblage of mushrooms that seemingly sprout from the green finch reflects on the natural process of decay that has been arrested in time by my intervention with the animal body. Through this artwork, I question my personal position on this newly established material practice, while simultaneously acknowledging my human self in this time of the Anthropocene. Further to being self-reflexive, this artwork possesses the potential for holding a mirror up to culture. And each of the animal artifacts that I'll be sharing with you today has been designed to fit into this larger artwork of the Museum of Extinction. Through this concept piece, I ask us to look at the animal as an object, to draw attention to the many ways in which the subjugation of the animal other is embedded in our culture, and then how this impacts human-animal relationships in the epoch of the sixth extinction. So while there is a very long history of artists working with animals, both dead and alive, the early 2000s saw a really sharp rise in taxidermy in contemporary art. And this was born from material artistic practice rather than traditional taxidermy. And trends like botched taxidermy produced hybridized, tattish, and garish experimental creations that really relied on shock value to draw our attention to issues around food and fur industry practices, trophy hunting, environmental decline, and also species loss, while simultaneously still seeming to relish in its own excess. However, in time, this approach evolved to become a dedicated theoretical tool for articulating that kind of artistic concern about the environment. And in 2018, the term speculative taxidermy was coined by the art historian Giovanni Alloy to describe art in which preserved animal materials are incorporated with the explicit aim to rethink human-animal relationships. And as Georgie mentioned, my own practice is situated in this field of speculative taxidermy. So while there are numerous examples of artists working with speculative taxidermy in the gallery, I have taken a particular interest in those who leave behind the white cube in order to recontextualize the spaces in which the artworks are placed, or vice versa, recontextualize the animal artifacts themselves. Through curatorial gestures that encourage the staging of artistic interventions, like Mark Dion's Tar Museum, Tessa Farmer's Little Savages, and Claire Morgan's By the Skin of the Teeth, artists have worked with and through taxidermy to give new meaning to natural history museum collections. And this specific work by Claire Morgan has had a huge impact on the trajectory of my practice. Field note, 30 September 2019. Upon entering the Great Hall of the Horniman Museum, I was confronted by something unexpected. A squirrel, fox, raven, and parakeet hung suspended, maws and beaks agape, each with a spiraling cone of small pieces of black plastic spewing from their mouths. The image has stayed with me ever since. What makes this work so impactful? Is it the juxtapositioning of the natural and man-made materials and the tension created at the point of the intersection? Or the unexpected confrontation with our own culpability in creating an uninhabitable planet for other species? So my research project calls for extending this range of artistic intervention from the Natural History Museum, where people perhaps expect to find or be confronted by issues around human and animal relationships, to cultural museums, where taxidermied animals are actually present, but obscured by the exceptionalism of man, the ready-made in an artwork, the skin on a drum, the fur of a coat. Animals whose function have shifted from a living being, a mother, brother, lover, predator, to tool, utilitarian, pedagogical material, and now animal artifact. Animals that exist in the ambiguous duality of a body as object and object as body. Why at the Cultural Museum? The utilitarian subjugation of the other than human for our own advancement has evolved well beyond matters of need. Driven by greed and speciesism, the unsubstantiated belief that our species' well-being and right to exist surpasses that of other life forms, we are creating a hostile living environment, not only for ourselves, but for all living creatures. A 2021 study by Kalagana, Nakawab, and Cornwall concluded that there are an estimated 50 billion wild birds left on the planet. That is 6 birds per person. While some have a surprisingly optimistic reaction to this revelation, it is worth considering the data against a similar study by Glaston and Blackburn from 1997, which calculated there to be 200 to 400 billion individual birds. At the time, that equated to approximately 60 birds per person. Now, one might argue that the human population has increased in that time frame and would impact the bird-to-person ratio, which is what I did. However, after some basic mathematics, it has been revealed that there is an astounding correlation between the human population growth of 25% from 6 billion to 8 billion between 1997 and 2021, and the decline in bird numbers of also 25% from 200 to 50 billion in that same time frame. So there's a direct correlation between these numbers. The Museum of Extinction is dedicated to the 150 billion birds that should have been, but are not. And through this project, I work to make the invisible loss visible. So further to the artistic work of Claire Morgan, I've come upon 2 examples of dead animals in natural history museums And of course, there are always displays in which a predator has caught its prey, but these scenes were different in that there is no reference to the cause of death, and the death itself becomes the subject of the diorama narrative. So the first I found in Lithuania is Tadas Ivanauskas Museum of Zoology, where a fallen falcon lies dead in a clearing in the woods, or so the diorama would have us believe. The second example is exhibited in Sweden's National Museum, where several squirrels are posed in inactivity, and in comparison, one lies lifeless in the bottom left corner. Field note, 23 August 2022. Oh no, it's dead, I overhear a teenage girl proclaim upon seeing the dead squirrel. Her friend responds in a rather dry tone. They're all dead. And therein lies the crux of the matter. By making death visible through material form, the animal absence is made explicit. By derailing the conventional taxidermic goal of reanimating the dead, attention is drawn to the death at the museum, leading to a recontextualized experience of all the other stilled lives in the collection. What draws people to look at animals is the innate urge to affiliate with other forms of life, a desire described by E.O. Wilson as biophilia. By introducing the death of the animal into public spaces, this desire could be confronted, and the animal surface can become a channel for communion between the living and the dead. But how do we get these dead animals into the museum? I needed a vehicle through which to mobilize my plans for artistic intervention. Consequently, I developed a speculative museum in an imagined future, along with the physical artifacts that will in due time populate its halls. This hypothetical museum will then loan the objects in its collection to actual museums in the present. Through the immersive experience of installation, visitors are invited to step through a space-time portal to become the subject within an orchestrated tableau of a tentative future. The physical manifestation of the Museum of Extinction resembles a shrine, a dark, quiet, and intimate space for reflection. The animal artifacts here are exhibited spaced, separated by darkness and revealed by light. The mood is somber and melancholic. Each encounter with a relic of reverence is marked as a distinguishable moment in time that draws an emotional response to these sacred bodies before us. A space has been carved for you to sit with your troubles. While the animal bodies in the museum have long been transformed, I also want to acknowledge the unformed material in the artist's hands, these bodies that are to be remade into the animal artifacts. Instead of forcing the animal material into the role of the utilitarian or the symbolic, how can we speculate with the animal, where the dead animal does not point merely symbolically to the loss of biodiversity, but it actually retains a piece of its own individuality to become an active agent rather than a passive participant in that active speculation. So with a background in lens-based art, I've spent the last 2 years developing what Petra Lang-Bundt refers to as a methodology of material complicity, to marginalize form, to give agency to material, to follow that material and act with the material. And to this end, I embedded myself into the world of natural history conservation and artifact production by taking an apprenticeship with Guus Vellesen at the Department of Clinical and Molecular Medicine at NTNU, which is the parent university to the Art Academy. So this shift from a lens-based practice to a material-led investigation of animal bodies as artistic medium required of me to learn the conservation techniques of taxidermy, skeleton articulation, entomology preservation, and more. And these processes all involve two very distinct phases, violence versus care. The deconstruction of the animal body can leave the animal lover rather traumatized. I'm personally a very empathetic person, and I feel a deep sense of loss for each of these lives or deaths that I have encountered. However, this is followed by the cathartic act of actually putting the broken animal back together. And I feel in some way that in mending their broken bodies, I'm also mending a piece of myself and of the world. So in order to reimagine narratives around the exceptionalism of man, we need not to only look at, but respond to the scene of the crime, i.e. the museum. I propose that we enter the site of investigation through the animal bodies, through the individual deaths and collective narratives in the context of the site of the museum. Because it is only through communing with the museum and the animal bodies that inhabit it that we can give a voice to the silent creatures that inertly dwell the institutional halls. So for example, the Sands of Time takes inspiration from a Victorian cloche I came upon in the archive of the Sverresborg Folk Museum. A glass dome filled with flowers and a small stuffed hummingbird variety, this type of home decor diorama became popularized in the late 1800s when natural history collection practices were at a high. This object motivated the creation of an antithesis to the traditional cloche narrative. So by turning the dome upside down and filling it with the skeletons of leaves and a crow, I am reflecting on the historical practice of excessive collection against the contemporary framework of the biodiversity crisis. Simultaneously, a sculpture and a cultural object, the mimetic potential of the animal artifact to simulate relics from the past allows the artistic intervention into a contemporary cultural institution. By virtue of the installation setting within the museum, the juxtapositioning of the artwork alongside existing objects allow them to establish a dialogue to comment on and respond to one another. Just allow this a second to twirl so you can see the final artwork. There he is. So for that part of my research, I gained access to the Museene Isurtrondelag's collection and knowledge through their scholarship program. And this enabled me to study the representation of animals in art at the Trondheim Kunstmuseum, artifacts of cultural heritage at the Sverresborg Folk Museum, decorative art and craft at the Noordenveldske Kunstindustrie Museum, and the musical instruments at the Ringve Music Museum. And my research was conducted in 3 phases. I did site visits as a public participant, then followed that with a survey via online questionnaire to the key curators that were going to assist me, and then together with them did an archive visit and documentation. And while my initial intention was to create a visual essay from this research, the process and findings inspired me to take an alternative approach to public dissemination, which is artistic intervention. So in order to proof the concept of artistic intervention, I have arranged a thematic tour at the Ringve Music Museum around exotic animal bodies that are embedded in the instrument collection. This performative intervention will start with a reconstructed scenario around one of my field notes on animal materialities arrested in a time and place that are foreign to their own, and then goes on to visit several museum artifacts before ending with the intervening animal artifact, which will be this taxidermied rainbow lorikeet, which is suspended in a cage constructed of bones, accompanied by sound elements of wings flapping. By juxtapositioning the motionless body of the bird with a subtle sound of movement, it serves to trigger for recontextualization, referring back to this opening narrative of bodies arrested in place. The event will close with a guided discussion in which we reflect together upon the experience of recontextualization and also how we may become more self-reflexive in our daily activities of perception. And this was a very exciting moment for me because when I documented this artwork, it was the first time that I actually got to see it from a distance. This has been created using wire and glue, and I've only been able to pick it up every day, once in the morning when I know the glue is dry and at arm's length to kind of gauge what I need to do next. And then I had to carry on working. So hanging this to document it has been a real pleasure to see the outcome of this work. So while the work may take a critical approach to institutionalized forms of animal representation, the goal is certainly not to subvert the museum by problematizing its structure, but rather to take it as an entry point for thinking together, working with those in positions of authority to create scenarios for public dissemination and participation, to address this moment between the past and the hypothetical future, and think about animals beyond utilitarianism, because that is very crucial in this time of addressing the loss of biodiversity. Field note, 27 April 2081. It is the year 2081. I've taken the post-apocalyptic name April Rain. The habitat loss that has led to the loss of biodiversity in the animal other soon impacted humans too. We never could awaken from our illusion of separateness. Now we live in a utopian dystopia. I have taken the role of memory keeper upon myself as the founder and curator of the Museum of Extinction, a collection of animal artifacts that reflect upon the sixth mass extinction. I now offer you the impossible opportunity to exhibit artifacts on loan from a speculative future. Thank you.